The morning my father was buried, my sister Greta handed me a coffee cup that wasn't mine and told me to make myself useful in the kitchen. I remember standing there, holding that cup, watching her move through our childhood home like she already owned it, because in her mind, she already did. There were 40 people in that house. Our aunts and uncles. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. My father's colleagues from the firm. My mother, Patricia, sitting in the corner armchair like a woman who had already made peace with something, or maybe someone had already made that peace for her. And me, Nora, the younger one, the quiet one, the one who had driven 6 hours the night before and slept on the pull-out sofa because Greta's children had the 2 guest rooms. I didn't fight it. I never fought it. That was the thing about my family. You didn't need to fight to lose. You just had to exist in the wrong order of birth. I set that coffee cup on the kitchen counter and I looked out the window at my father's garden. He had planted those rose bushes himself 20 years ago, when my mother's knees were still good and my sister and I were teenagers who didn't appreciate any of it. He spent every Sunday morning out there, in a worn denim shirt, working in complete silence. I used to watch him from the upstairs window and think that gardening was something sad people did. It wasn't until I was 34 and sitting in a lawyer's office after my own divorce that I understood he wasn't sad. He was just someone who preferred to speak through things that lasted. Greta was different. Greta spoke through rooms, through titles, through the way she walked into a space and rearranged it around herself without asking. That evening, after most of the guests had left, she gathered what remained of us in the living room. Marcus, her husband, stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed like he was posing for a portrait. My mother sat in the same chair she'd been in all day. Greta stood in the center of the room, always in the center, and she said, with the calm of someone who had been rehearsing, that she wanted us to discuss the estate before things got complicated. I looked at her. She didn't look at me. She said our father had left a will, and that she had spoken to an attorney the week before, and that everything had been arranged simply and cleanly, and there was really nothing for any of us to be confused about. She said the house, the 3-story Victorian with the rose bushes and the wraparound porch, and the finished basement my father used as a study would be passing to her. That had been, she said, Dad's clear intention. Marcus smiled at the fireplace. My mother nodded slowly, like a woman hearing something she already knew. I asked one question. I said, which attorney? Greta looked at me then, just for a second, and she said, Rupert Oakes, you don't know him. She was right that I didn't know him, but I knew the name. I had heard it exactly once before, on a Tuesday 3 months earlier, when my father had called me at 8 in the morning and said he needed to tell me something important, and that I should write down a name. I wrote it down. I didn't ask him why. I didn't push. We had that kind of relationship, the kind where the important things were said once, quietly, and trusted to land where they needed to. I put the name in the Notes app on my phone, and I saved it under the word wait. That was the word my father used a lot toward the end. Wait, don't react yet. The picture isn't finished. So I waited. The night of the funeral, while Greta explained to the remaining family that she would be taking over management of the estate and that she hoped everyone would respect the process, I sat in a chair near the window and I waited. When she looked at me and said, "You understand, Nora, that this is just how Dad wanted things," I said, "I heard you." She seemed satisfied with that. She shouldn't have been. But that was the thing about Greta. She had spent 44 years being the one who was listened to. The beautiful one, the confident one, the one who made our parents proud in the ways you could show other people. Honor roll certificates, a good marriage, a house in a good neighborhood, children who dressed well. She had mistaken being heard for being right for so long that she had stopped noticing the difference. I drove home the next morning, 6 hours back. My daughter Ivy, who was 9 at the time, slept most of the way with her head against the car window. Somewhere around the second hour, she woke up and asked me if we were going to visit Grandpa's house again. I said I didn't know yet. She asked if Aunt Greta lived there now. I said she thought she did. Ivy looked out the window for a long moment and then said, in that clear, uncomplicated way children have of cutting straight to the thing nobody wants to name, "But Grandpa liked you better, Mum." I could tell. I kept my eyes on the road. I said, "Grandpa loved us both." She nodded, not entirely convinced, and went back to sleep. She wasn't wrong, though. My father loved Greta, the way you love something familiar and certain. But with me, it was different. I was the one who called him on Tuesday mornings. I was the one who drove 6 hours just to sit with him in the garden for an afternoon and not say very much. I was the one he trusted with the name. I need to tell you about the years before the funeral, because none of what came after makes sense without them. My father, Warren Callan, had spent his career as a land assessor. Quiet work, methodical work, the kind of job that requires patience and precision and an attention to detail that most people would find suffocating. He loved it. He retired at 68 with a reputation that, in the small world of county property records, was as close to sterling as anything gets. The family home had been in his name since 1987. He had paid it off by 1999. Over the years, as the neighborhood changed and property values climbed, it had appreciated in ways that surprised even him. When he had it appraised for insurance purposes 2 years before he died, the number came back at just over $3 million. Greta had been asking, in various subtle and not so subtle ways, about the estate for the last decade. She never said it plainly. She said things like, "Dad, have you thought about what happens to the house?" She said things like, "We should probably talk about the future while we're all healthy and clear-headed." She said things like, "I just want to make sure Mom is taken care of." She always framed it around our mother. Our mother, Patricia, had a way of going along with things that felt, from the outside, like wisdom, but was actually closer to exhaustion. She had been deferring to Greta since Greta was 6 years old and figured out that if she cried hard enough in the right direction, things moved. By the time they were adults, the pattern was invisible. It was just how things were. Patricia agreed with Greta the way she breathed without thinking about it, without noticing she was doing it. My father noticed. He noticed everything. But he was a man who believed that what you built in private was more durable than what you argued about in public. He didn't fight with Greta about the estate. He smiled and changed the subject, and then went back to his study and did what he was always doing. What he was always doing, it turned out, was making sure things were arranged the way he actually wanted them. In the months after the funeral, Greta moved quickly. She hired a contractor to assess the house. She had a locksmith change 2 of the 3 entry locks. She set up a forwarding address for my mother and began having her own mail sent there. She told my mother, gently but firmly, that the family house needed some renovation before anyone could really use it, and that in the meantime, Mom should enjoy the spare bedroom in Greta and Marcus's house. My mother said that sounded fine. I got a call from Marcus about 6 weeks after the funeral. He was businesslike about it. He said that they were going to need to finalize the estate transfer and that I should probably get my personal items out of storage if I had left anything at the house. I had left a few boxes in the basement. Things from my childhood, old photographs, a small wooden jewelry box my father had made me when I was 12. I asked him when would be a good time to come. He said he would check the calendar and get back to me. He never called back. I drove up 3 weeks later without telling anyone. I had a key to the basement door, a door they apparently hadn't thought to rekey. I went in, found my boxes, and spent 2 hours in my father's study before I left. I don't know what I expected to feel, sitting at his desk in that quiet room with the afternoon light coming in through the garden window. Grief, maybe. Anger. something large and nameable. What I felt was something smaller and stranger. I felt like he was still there. Not in a supernatural way, I'm not that kind of person. But in the way you feel the shape of someone even after they've left a room. His handwriting was on a notepad by the phone, his reading glasses were folded on top of a dictionary. And there, in the top right drawer of his desk, under a folder of old receipts, was an envelope. My name was on it. Not Nora Callan, just my daughter, the quiet one. I sat there for a long time before I opened it. The letter inside was 3 pages, written in my father's careful, even hand. He had dated it 14 months before he died. He wrote the way he talked, without a lot of decoration, without sentiment that he couldn't actually afford. He said he had been thinking about the future. He said he had always known that what he built should go to the person most likely to protect it. He said he loved both his daughters, but that love and trust were different things, and he had long understood which one of us he trusted. He told me about a document. He told me about Rupert Oakes. And he told me to wait until the time was right. He said, "You'll know. When she's stopped listening for you, you'll know." I folded the letter and put it in my coat pocket and walked out of the house without taking any of my boxes. I drove to the nearest coffee shop and sat in my car for 40 minutes. Then I called the number my father had written at the bottom of the 3rd page. Rupert Oakes answered on the 2nd ring. He said he had been expecting my call. He said not soon, he was careful about that. He said my father had given very specific instructions about timing. There was a minimum period my father wanted to give Greta, not as a gift, but as enough rope. My father, it turned out, understood his oldest daughter precisely. Rupert asked me one question. He said, "Has she changed the locks?" I said yes. He said, "Good. That's in the file." I didn't ask him to explain that. I had learned, from watching my father, that some things were more useful when they weren't explained too early. I went home to my daughter and I went back to my work, and I did not call Greta or Marcus or my mother for 6 weeks. When I finally called my mother, I kept it brief and warm and told her nothing. She told me the renovation at the house was going beautifully and that Greta had picked out the most lovely tile for the kitchen and that Marcus was thinking of renting out the upper floor to help with the carrying costs. I said that sounded interesting. She said, "Wasn't Greta just so capable?" I said yes. What I did not say was that 3 days earlier, I had driven back to the county records office and spent an afternoon with a clerk named Beverly who had worked there for 22 years and was the kind of woman who knew exactly where everything was and was quietly amused by people who thought records couldn't be found. Beverly had found what I was looking for in 11 minutes. I spent the next 3 years building something. That sounds more dramatic than it was. What I actually spent 3 years doing was what I always did, working carefully, moving methodically, trusting the process. I was a licensed estate accountant. I understood how assets were structured, how trusts worked, how a document recorded in the right place at the right time could sit quietly for years and still be fully, legally, unimpeachably real. My father had understood the same things. In the 2nd year, Greta listed the upper floor of the house for rent. She found tenants, a young couple, both teachers, and began collecting rent. In the 3rd year, she and Marcus began talking to a developer about converting the lower property line into a commercial access point. The development deal was worth, by Marcus's estimate, somewhere around $400,000. I let them talk. I kept paying my own bills. I kept working. I called my mother every 2 weeks and listened to updates about tile and landscaping and how the rose bushes needed to be ripped out because they were getting overgrown. That one landed differently. My father's rose bushes, but I let it go because the picture wasn't finished. It was finished in the spring of what I can only describe as the most ordinary Tuesday of my life. I had dropped Ivy at school. I had made coffee. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone face up when Rupert Oakes called. He said, "I think it's time." He said Marcus had formally submitted the development proposal to the county planning board. He said they had done so using documentation that listed Greta Shaw as sole owner of the property. He said that documentation had been notarized and submitted as a matter of public record. He said, "They've committed to it in writing, publicly. That's what your father was waiting for." I said, "What happens now?" He said, "Now I knock on a door. I want to be very clear about something, because I think it matters for everything that comes after. I did not want to destroy my sister. I know how these stories can sound cold, calculated, triumphant. And there was a part of me, I won't pretend otherwise, that had carried a low, constant anger for 3 years. The anger of someone who has been dismissed so many times she stopped expecting anything different. But what I wanted was not to destroy Greta. What I wanted was what was mine. What my father had decided was mine. What was documented, legal, signed and witnessed and filed in a county records office 14 months before my father died. Rupert Oakes drove to my sister's house on a Thursday morning in April. He knocked on her door at 10 o'clock. He was carrying a legal folder, a sealed county document, and a letter from my father. Greta answered the door in workout clothes. She later told my mother she thought he was there about the development deal. He was not there about the development deal. He introduced himself. He said he was the executor of Warren Callan's estate. He said he had been appointed to that role 7 years before my father's death, and that he had a document to deliver that had been held in trust per the deceased's specific written instructions. Greta said she didn't understand. She said she had already handled the estate. She said there was a will. Rupert said yes, there was a will. And then he said, "There's also a trust." Greta called me 20 minutes later. Her voice was something I had never heard from her before. Not angry, not controlled, not performing. Just stripped. She said, "What did you do?" I said, "Finish reading the documents, Greta." She said, "This isn't real." I said, "Rupert Oakes has been holding that trust for 3 years. If you'd like to verify it, you can call the county clerk's office. Beverly will pull it for you." There was silence. Then she said, "Mom doesn't know about this." I said, "Then you should be the one to tell her. I want to tell you about the trust, because it is the center of everything and I think it deserves to be understood clearly." My father had established it 9 years before he died. Not as a response to Greta's behavior, it predated her estate conversations by several years. He had done it quietly, with Rupert Oakes, as part of a broader plan to ensure that the property was protected and that it passed to the person he had chosen. He had updated it twice, once when he retired and once 14 months before he died, after what I can only assume was a conversation or an observation that confirmed something he had already suspected about how things would go. The trust was structured simply. The family home, along with all assets attached to it, and all appreciation accrued since the trust's creation, was held in a revocable living trust of which I, Nora Callan, was the sole beneficiary. It had been filed with the county. It had been witnessed and notarized. It was, in every legal sense, real and complete and untouchable. The will that Greta had found, the will she had shown to an attorney and used as the basis for her 3 years of decision-making, was a document my father had created 7 years before his death. It predated the trust. Under standard estate law, the trust superseded the will in every area where they overlapped, which was every area. Rupert had explained all of this to my father before the trust was finalized. My father had signed it knowing exactly what it meant. He had chosen not to tell Greta. He had chosen not to tell my mother. He had chosen to tell only me through a letter in a desk drawer, through a name in a phone, through a single word: wait. He had waited his whole life for things to be right. He had decided I could be trusted to do the same. The development deal fell apart within a week. The County Planning Board, upon reviewing the ownership documentation submitted by Marcus Shaw, discovered a discrepancy with the county's own records. They put the application on hold, pending resolution of the ownership question. Marcus called me directly. He was not calm about it. He said I had set this up deliberately. He said I had waited until they were invested to pull the rug out. He said a lot of things that I let him finish before I said, "The trust was filed 9 years ago. I didn't set anything up, Marcus. I just waited." He asked what I wanted. I said I wanted what was mine. He said there had to be something we could work out. He mentioned numbers. He mentioned the renovation work they had done, which he said deserved compensation. He mentioned my mother's comfort and stability as something I should be thinking about. I said I was thinking about my mother's comfort. I said I had been thinking about it for 3 years. He hung up. The family meeting happened not because I called one, but because my mother called one. Patricia, who had spent her whole life allowing other people to organize things around her, picked up her phone and told both her daughters and both their respective partners that she wanted everyone in the same room. She held it at the family home, her home, because that was, at least in her mind, still where the serious things happened. I drove up the night before and stayed in a motel 20 minutes away. I brought Ivy because Ivy had asked to come, and because there was a part of me that wanted my daughter there, not as a prop, not as a shield, but because I had spent 3 years doing something her grandfather had trusted me to do, and I wanted her to see how it ended. We arrived at 11 in the morning. Greta and Marcus were already there. Greta was standing in the kitchen with the beautiful new tile, and she looked at me with an expression that I had never seen on her face before. It wasn't quite anger. It wasn't quite grief. It was something that looked like she was meeting me for the first time. My mother was in the living room, in her chair. Marcus was by the fireplace, again, like he had rehearsed it. Rupert Oakes was seated at the dining room table with his legal folder open in front of him. I had asked him to be there. He had said he would come as a courtesy. Ivy sat beside me on the sofa with her hands folded in her lap. Greta started by saying she wanted to understand how this had happened. She said she had spoken to an attorney, not Rupert, another one who had confirmed that the will was a legitimate document and that she had acted in good faith on its provisions for 3 years. Rupert said she was correct, that she had acted on a legitimate document. He then explained, for the second time since Thursday, that the trust superseded the will. Marcus said that couldn't be right. Rupert opened his folder and placed a set of documents on the dining room table. County certification, trust filing, amendment dated 14 months before Warren Callan's death. He placed them in a neat row, like a man who had done this before, which he had. My mother looked at the documents for a long time. Then she said something that I hadn't expected. She said, "He told me." Everyone went quiet. She said, "Your father told me, about 2 years before he died. He said he had made arrangements. He said the house was going to Nora." She paused. I didn't want to believe it. I thought if I went along with Greta, it would, I don't know what I thought. I think I thought it would work itself out. Greta turned to look at our mother. My mother looked at her hands. Ivy, sitting beside me, said nothing. She was 9 years old, and she understood perfectly well what was happening in that room, and she was quiet because she had learned, from watching me, that quiet was sometimes the most powerful thing you could offer. It was Marcus who finally said what Greta was apparently not going to say. He said the renovation work had to be worth something. He said they had invested in the property. He said there needed to be some kind of settlement. I said, "Rupert, can you explain the relevant section?" Rupert pulled a second document from his folder. He explained that my father, anticipating exactly this situation, had included a specific provision: any modifications or improvements made to the property after the date of his death and prior to the trust's formal execution would be evaluated and compensated at fair market value, minus any rental income collected during the same period. They had collected 3 years of rent on the upper floor. The math, it turned out, was not in Marcus's favor. He read the document twice. Then he put it down on the table and he walked out of the room. Not dramatically, not loudly. He just stood up, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, and left through the front door. I heard his car start in the driveway. Greta stayed. She stayed for a long time, sitting at that dining room table with her hands flat on the wood, not speaking. Rupert quietly gathered his documents and said he would be in touch regarding the formal transfer timeline. He nodded to me and to my mother, and he let himself out. There were 3 of us left: Greta, my mother, me, and Ivy sitting on the sofa, very still. I want to be honest about what that moment felt like, because I think it would be dishonest to describe it as triumphant. It wasn't. It was one of the strangest and quietest things I have ever sat inside. 3 years of waiting, and it ended not with a confrontation, but with a car pulling out of a driveway and 3 women sitting in a room with their hands on their laps. Greta said, eventually, "Did you know the whole time?" I said, "I found out a few months after the funeral." She said, "And you just waited?" I said, "Yes." She looked at the window. She said, "Dad always said you were patient." I thought he meant it as a criticism. I didn't answer that. My mother said, quietly, "He meant it as a compliment." None of us spoke for a while after that. I don't know what Greta felt in that room. I know what I saw on her face, and what I saw was complicated and human, and nothing like the clean categories I had sometimes put her in during the hardest years. I had been angry at her, genuinely angry, in ways I hadn't always admitted to myself. And sitting there, I didn't feel that anger anymore. I felt tired and relieved. And something that took me a few days to name properly, which was a kind of grief not for what she had done, but for what we had never been to each other and what we probably weren't going to become now. She left an hour later. She said goodbye to our mother. She said goodbye to me. She looked at Ivy and said she was glad she had come. Ivy said goodbye politely, the way a well-raised child says goodbye to someone she doesn't know very well. The formal transfer took 4 months. There were documents and filings and a few tense conversations with Marcus through a mediator. The rental income from the upper floor was applied against the renovation claim, and in the end, Marcus received a smaller settlement for legitimate structural work, wiring, and plumbing, mostly that Rupert and a neutral contractor agreed had real value. It was not the outcome Marcus had wanted, but it was the outcome that was fair. And Rupert was very good at fair. I moved into the house in the fall. Ivy chose the room at the top of the stairs, the one with the window that looks over the backyard. She said she liked how she could see the garden from there. I had the rose bushes trimmed, not replaced. They were overgrown, as Greta had said, but they were alive. A gardener I found through a neighbor spent 2 days on them and told me they were actually very healthy underneath. He said they just needed someone to pay attention. My mother visits every other weekend. She sleeps in the room that was always hers when she came to stay, the one next to the garden-facing window. She and Ivy have developed their own language board games after dinner, afternoon walks on the good days, the quiet kind of company that doesn't require much explanation. My mother and I have not had a dramatic reconciliation. That would not have been true to either of us. What we have is something slower and more honest, the kind of relationship you build when you stop pretending that everything before was fine and start just being in the same room without pretending. She told me once, a few months after I moved in, that she had spent a long time feeling like she owed Greta something. She couldn't explain exactly what. Some debt of expectation, maybe. Some idea about who the oldest child was supposed to be. She said she was sorry she had carried that more than she had carried the truth. I said I understood. She said she wasn't sure she did really, but she was trying. I still speak to Greta, not often, not warmly exactly, but we speak. She moved with Marcus to a townhouse in a different part of the city. He is working on other development deals. She is Greta. She is someone who was shaped a certain way by a certain kind of love, and who did what people shaped that way do, and who lives now with the outcome of it. I am not her enemy. I was never her enemy. I was just the other daughter, the quiet one, the one my father trusted. I work from the study now. My father's desk is still there. His reading glasses are gone, but the dictionary is still on the shelf. I don't use it. I have a phone like everyone else, but I don't move it either. Some things are worth keeping in their place. Ivy turned 12 last spring. She is tall and observant and slightly too serious for her age, which I suspect she got from me, and I try not to feel too guilty about it. She asked me recently, during one of our drives, what the house had meant to Grandpa. I thought about it for a mile or so. Then I said, I think it meant that some things should outlast the people who want to take them. She looked out the window and nodded, like that was an acceptable answer. It was the most honest thing I could say. My father spent his whole career assessing the value of land. He understood, better than most people, that value is not just a number. It's what something means to the person who built it, and what it will mean to the person who inherits it, and whether those two people are aligned in the ways that actually matter. He assessed his daughters the same way. He got it right. I kept the rose bushes. He didn't leave me the house because I deserved it more. He left it to me because he knew I'd keep the roses alive.